What's up, everyone? Kevin here from Skywatcher. Welcome to another episode of the What's Up Webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. We cover everything from what's up in the nighttime sky to equipment to helpful tips and tricks. And, of course, at the end of the month, we have a special guest to talk about their specialty in the field of astronomy. If you've never been here before, welcome. If you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe. Leave a like on a video. If you have an idea for a What's Up Webcast episode, please email us at info@skywatchusa.com and title it What's Up. Really quick, we are running behind on shipping out totem patches. Some of our team has been sick, and it's delayed us getting into the office and actually shipping those out. So we should have that going out hopefully next week, and we'll make up for the last few months that we haven't had those shipped out. So if you're waiting on them, we're working on it. We're getting the list together. We do get your emails, so you won't be forgotten. It's just there's been some stuff that's delayed us from getting out the door. So today we are doing choosing a refractor for visual. This is an episode we did a couple years ago, but changes all the time. We get a lot of questions about this stuff, and we've added some stuff and flushed out the presentation a little bit. So for many of you, this is going to be a review. But with Milky Way season right around the corner, there's a lot of stuff to consider, and refractors can be a great tool to utilize when it comes to this stuff here. We're going to end up using this later, so let me shoot that down there. Also, if you want to support the channel, you can head over to skywatcher.threadless.com, pick up some cool swag over there, or you could always pick up a scope from us or mount or whatever you got going on from skywatchusa.com. You can order right from the website or from your favorite dealer. There's a lot of options for getting your Skywatcher gear. So, and then, of course, if you need any assistance with Skywatcher products, we do have a support team right here in the United States. They are based in California, and then we also have our repair teams also here in the States. So if you want to talk to someone, Skywatcher actually has people you can talk to, not a switchboard, not a bunch of random stuff. Call the number, talk to Alex. Simple as that. Email us. You're getting Alex. Sometimes you're getting me, but you're talking to real people, and we're right here to support you. And we're astronomers too. We completely understand what you're going through when stuff isn't working, and we just want to get you taken care of and out to the races. So, all right, so let's get started, and let's go over the type of refractors. Now, if you're, like I said, if you're new, this is a good crash course on understanding refractors, but for many of us, we already know how a lot of this works. So the most basic type of refractor, of course, is going to be an achromatic refractor. These are normally a doublet design, so they use two elements of glass in their objective lens, and there can be some slight variations on the design depending on how the approach is done, but on generic off-the-shelf mass-produced achromat refractors, it's a doublet design. Nothing real fancy. Like I said, composed of two elements of glass. There's no real exotic glass being used whatsoever, but the problem with achromatic refractors is they're going to suffer from something called chromatic aberration. This is due to the fact that the objective lens cannot focus all the colors to one focus point. So you get this weird blue fringing. If you look like back in the 80s and 90s with like TV cameras, you'll notice that there can be blue fringe on bright objects. If you are using cheap binoculars, you'll notice this as well, or cheap camera lenses, you'll notice all this blue fringe around like highly reflective things with a lot of light coming off of them. That's chromatic aberration. Now, achromats can be good for visual observing, and the nice thing about them is you can generally get a good size, impressive telescope without spending a tremendous amount of money on it. So an achromat is a good way to get your feet wet in the world of refractors without going crazy overboard. Now, they're not going to be great for astrophotography because the cameras are going to be able to pick up all that blue fringing, that chromatic aberration. It looks a lot like this. You'll see all the stars in the field have blue around them. That's chromatic aberration, which tells us the scope is not focusing all the light to one point. And it gives you this really blue, violet, funky looking star. But at times, and depending on what we're observing, because this is a visual episode, chromatic aberration becomes irrelevant. And I've also spoken to people where it doesn't bother them. And there are ways around it if you want to go about that. But there are other options, more costly options, that we can go further into that. So one issue with chromatic aberration is the shorter the focal length of the telescope and the larger the aperture, the more fringing you're going to get. So if you have a larger refractor and it's shorter, so a faster focal length, it will have much more severe aberration than, say, something longer. If you extend the focal length, it helps correct that color aberration because it's not so extreme. You'll still see it, but it won't be like a kaleidoscope rather than just blue fringing. I know this episode is about choosing a refractor for visual, but why would you choose one over a Schmidt-Cassegrain? I can wrap with that a little later. We should probably do an episode on choosing a Cassegrain for visual as well. Let me get a little further into this because there's a particular section that we're almost near, and I will bring your Schmidt-Cassegrain question back into that. But again, for those who are watching, or if you're watching this or listening to this on the podcast variation in the future, the question is, I know this episode is about choosing a refractor for visual, but why would you choose one over a Schmidt-Cassegrain? So we'll talk about that here in a second. So the next design, there are two major designs of refractors. There's achromatic and apochromatic, and obviously there are subclassifications below those two. So apochromatic is where the telescope uses some kind of exotic glass to help correct for that blue fringing. The most basic version of that is known as an ED doublet, or extra low dispersion glass doublet. And that performs very similar, or it looks very similar to a standard achromatic refractor because it is using two pieces of glass in the objective, so they're a doublet design. However, one of the elements in the objective is using a high-end, very exotic glass. That could either be fluorite crystal, that could be a synthetic fluorite like ED glass. There's also super dispersion glass. There's all kinds of combinations that you can do out there. Here's a picture for those of you who are actually watching. Here's a picture of one of our EvoStar 120 doublets. I actually pulled it out. I did put some tape on the side of there just to hold the glass pieces together as they're in the stack. But you can see there's the front lens, and then there's a spacer, and then there's the rear lens. The rear lens in this case is the FPL 53 ED, or the extra low dispersion glass. Actually, FPL 53, FCD 100, FPL 55, FK 95, fluorite. Those would all, technically, I would put them more in the super low dispersion glass category. Those are like your top performing glass options, and I'm sure there's more out there. So for ED doublets, it's composed of two elements. One of them is an exotic one, so either super low or extremely low or fluorite or whatever the case may be. There's something expensive in that objective. That helps reduce or eliminate the color aberrations and gives everything to be more true color. But it also depends on the design of the telescope. When we're talking about ED doublets, the shorter and faster the telescope is and the larger the aperture, you can still get color aberration. So for best performance, ED doublets generally have to have longer focal lengths because that also helps control that color aberration. So these are excellent. ED doublets are excellent for observing because they're lightweight, they're well color corrected, but you're not paying an obscene amount of money in comparison to the more exotic triplets and quadruplets and other stuff that's really geared for astrophotography. A good ED doublet will take care of you for a while. So here's how that works. ED doublets, the longer the focal length, it helps better control the color aberration. What did astrophysics mean when they revealed their new... what did astrophysics mean when they revealed their new refractor that said super achromatic at NEAF? Any ideas by any chance? So, yeah, there's designs out there that can actually allow you to get this apochromatic, color-corrected performance without using these really exotic glasses. And this is really nothing new. A lot of these designs are fairly old, but yes, you haven't seen it really in the mainstream of like telescope manufacturers. So if you were at NEAF or you've seen what's happened at NEAF, astrophysics is always known for really pushing the limits on stuff. So what Tolga in the chat is actually asking about is these new astrophysics Starfire CS super achromats. So a super achromat, and it actually goes into details here, and they've tweaked the design, obviously, because the CS stands for Christian Super Achromat. So Roland over at Astrophysics has tweaked this design. As you can see here, it's like from the 1800s. It's not a new design. These are triplets, but the whole point is to achieve a completely color-corrected image when the telescope is at focus. Out of focus, you're going to get all kinds of color issues, but when you're at focus, it'll be incredibly well color-corrected. That's the goal. So that's really what's going on here with a super achromat, is that it's designed using whatever that design utilizes to use more regularly available glass. I'm sure there's something special going on in there, and achieving a apochromatic performance at focus. So that's really what's going on there. Now, if you want to know more, you can head over to astro-physics.com and read all about the CS series. They've got all kinds of technical details that tell you all about how this thing works. But yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell what's going on with those scopes. Okay, let's see. Moving on, we have the ED triplets. This is also another apochromatic design. You and I have all heard about these telescopes. A lot of major manufacturers, including us, have produced these. I'm sure the name tells you, triplet, utilizing 3 pieces of glass. Generally, one of those pieces of one of the elements in there is an ED glass of some kind, or fluoride, or whatever. Insert whatever high-end glass is being used. Some of them use multiple ED lenses, but it just depends on what the design utilizes. Like the Takahashi TOAs, they use 2 FPL 53 elements on the rear 2 lenses. So the front one's crown, and then the other 2 are the ED glasses. You pay a lot of money for that, but they're designed to be very well high-corrected telescopes. So like I said earlier, a triplet apo is composed of 3 elements. 1 or more is an ED glass or super low dispersion. Usually the ED glass is either sandwiched in the center or at the rear. It's very rarely, if ever, put on the front because that glass is difficult to work with. You don't want to damage it. Because you have better correction due to the extra elements, you're able to actually make these scopes faster and more compact, which makes it easy to be more travel friendly when we're talking about visual use. You can get a wider field of view, and yeah, so that's really the goal of the faster stuff. These are great for visual work as well as astrophotography, triplets, but you end up paying a lot more for a triplet because there's a lot more effort that goes on there. Now you're talking about a telescope that has 6 optical surfaces that have to be polished rather than 4. So you got to go more into that as well. There's a bunch of questions here. Let's see. Did the astrophysics one. Have you ever looked through a 150 millimeter f15? Is it really the ultimate visual refractor? I haven't spent a ton of time with long focal length refractors. I've used an 8-inch f12 D&G a long time ago. I don't know if I've ever used a 6-inch one. They're nice. They're just big, like big. So, here's the issue with long focal length refractors, especially from a manufacturer's perspective. They don't sell. They just don't. I know there's a cult following to this. I know some of you out there like, you need to make a whatever refractor that's this long. They don't sell. And in our neck of the woods as a business, I can't sell something where the market is uber tiny. Now, I do respect the fact that there are people out there that want these. There's nothing wrong with that. I think they're really cool telescopes. As an astronomer, they're really cool telescopes, and they tend to be very sharp. Those long focus refractors are very sharp. But I have to play both sides of the fence. So I have to be the amateur astronomer over here and be like, that's a really cool telescope. I love that. But then I also have to do my job over here and be like, that doesn't make sense from a business perspective. When it comes to choosing what to move forward with in the telescope market, you have to go with what's going to sell. And when we mean sell, we don't mean 5 or 10. We mean hundreds when it comes to Skywatcher because we're mass production. So could we do it? Yeah, easy, no problem. Making a 6-inch f15 for our team would probably not be difficult to do whatsoever. They just wouldn't sell. The market right now is fueled by astrophotography. That is the demand. That's where the focus is because that's where the money is being spent on the customer side of things. And not everything will be focused on astrophotography. We have stuff coming out that isn't all photography based. But when it comes to refractors, it does not make sense for us to make a big, long focal length refractor. And for those of you who want that, I'm sorry. It doesn't make sense. That era just doesn't exist anymore. Photography has taken over, and we have to think about that. So, let's see. Another question. Do the Skywatcher Equinox refractors have the same optics as the EvoStar ED? That is my understanding. That was before me. We were looking at bringing in the Equinox when I first started 13 years ago. But they were phasing them out by the time I was getting started. We only have one at our office just for the sake of having one. It's a fairly rare version, but I haven't seen many of them, but we have a 100 millimeter F9 Equinox. I've seen the 66, I've seen the 80, and I've seen the 120s. But I very rarely have seen a 100 out in the wild. But we have a 100 F9 Equinox in the office just as a display piece. It's a nice scope. But my understanding is, yes, the 80, 100, 120 were all the same optics as the EvoStars. Be nice if someone made a 6-inch f15. I understand. Look on the used market for a D&G or an iStar. An iStar's gone too, unfortunately. They made some nice stuff. Let's see. Brand new to visual astro. What's my first buy to get my feet wet? Low budget, good place to look for used equipment, etc. Besides Facebook Marketplace. Yeah, Facebook is junk. If you know what you're looking for, you could probably track something down on Facebook or Craigslist. Most of the stuff on there is people who don't know what they're talking about, and they're expecting way too much money for something that isn't worth it. But every now and again, you can get a real gem. Sometimes you could check with your local astronomy club. I know one of the clubs out here in the Phoenix, Arizona area is the East Valley Astronomy Club does a really nice job at posting used equipment. And they've had some really nice stuff up there before at good prices. Sometimes your local club might have some stuff that members are getting rid of, which is a good way to get into it. And as people have posted in there, you can go Cloudy Nights Classifieds are very nice because you actually are joining the community. Or Astromart. And it's $15 to join Astromart, but Astromart is really nice. And they do a very nice job at keeping the riffraff out. So it's very rare to get scammed on Astromart. Not saying it doesn't happen, but they do a very good job at working on that. And it's $15. And then you can see what used prices are on things. And then you could always talk to telescope shops. You have like Woodland Hills Camera, Cloudbreak Optics, High Point Science. I know a lot of them take in used or trade-in gear. Sometimes you can really score something from one of those shops too. But you have to go and see what they've got. So Skywatcher's going Astro only now? No, I didn't say that. I said that's where the majority of the market share is. So we have to be very focused on that, but that doesn't mean everything we're working on is dedicated to that, because the visual side is still equally important. But a large majority are doing astrophotography. So a lot of stuff gets geared to that because that's where a lot of money is coming in. That's why you see a lot of stuff from most companies tends to be geared more to the astrophotography side. But that doesn't mean everything. We've got several scopes that are being developed right now that will be very interesting for visual. And we'll tell you guys about those when they come out. And of course, any telescope that you can use for astrophotography, for the most part, unless it's something exotic, can be used for visual. Okay, so we talked about the basic refractor design. So which one do you choose? Well, it all depends on what the heck we're doing. So there's really like four major arenas. There's deep sky, wide field, planets, and then you could get kind of all of those together where you're trying to, work out all of that. So I'm a big fan of refractors. That's kind of my main area of interest. They're my go-to telescopes for events because they're very low maintenance. Don't really have to collimate them. But their one major limitation is aperture. If you want to have a big aperture refractor, that gets really expensive and hard to obtain. So it can be difficult to find a big refractor. So refractors are one of my favorites, but then after that we go to Dobsonians when you want some seriously large aperture. Cassegrains are nice as well, and we'll touch on that here in a second. So when you're going to be buying a refractor, especially for visual, what is your application? Because a lot of times people are like, oh, if you're doing planets, you need a refractor. That's not necessarily wrong. They do a really nice thing. So for deep sky, we'll start with deep sky. So really any telescope is going to work well for deep sky. You can use an achromatic, you can use a doublet, you can use a triplet. The thing about I got derailed here, sorry. The thing about achromats is we did talk about earlier how it's like, oh no, they have chromatic aberration. Yes, that is true. Except when it comes to deep sky observing, you're not looking at bright objects. You're looking at faint objects. This is where an achromat can really excel, because an achromatic refractor, particularly a big one, has really high contrast because there's no secondary obstruction like on a Cassegrain or a Newtonian. It's completely unobstructed. But you get this really rich contrast, really needlepoint stars, and I find that the larger refractors tend to punch a little bit above their listed aperture because they don't have that scatter that's presented with a secondary obstruction. So using like a 5 or 6 inch achromat can really kind of feel more like you're using an 8-inch Cassegrain because you don't have that obstruction. Skywatcher needs to bring out a 10-inch matte Cass. What if we did one that was smaller? Maybe if it wasn't 10 or 9, but what if we did something in the 8-inch class? Would that work? So anyway, we'll do matte Casses another time. But so when you're doing deep sky, achromatic refractors are perfectly fine. They do a great job. The one that probably comes to mind the most, I've actually owned one of these. And a friend of mine had one of these. It's one of my favorite telescopes. I wouldn't say they're the most amazing refractors ever, but if you want a taste of a big refractor without dumping the money of a super expensive high-end refractor, I'm a big fan of the Celestron C6R. It's a 6-inch f8 achromat refractor. They do pair it on an AVX, which is a little light. But you can get the 6-inch refractor and a go-to mount for like just over $2,000, which is crazy. That's a serious refractor. If you want a taste of what a big refractor is like, the C6R is quite nice. And you're not having to go down that route of spending a ton of money on an apochromatic. And these things on deep sky are phenomenal. So that could be, they work really well. I've had some amazing deep sky views of galaxies through not only the 6-inch version, but also the 120 millimeter version. And Celestron does sell the Omni. This guy right here, the Omni XLT 120. I've had a few of these under various brands. One of the best views of the Whirlpool galaxy I have ever seen. It wasn't super bright, but the contrast was there. The field was fairly wide, but it was from a dark sky site. The 120 was great for visual. And it's not too big, and it gives you that 5-inch class refractor without having to be expensive. So that's really nice if you don't want to break the bank. Now, you can also use an ED doublet like the Evo stars that we've had. Takahashi has doublets. You know, really anything works for deep sky. But the big thing is all about aperture. That's all comes down to what you're trying to do. And this is where the Schmidt-Cassegrain question came up earlier. I'm going to bring this one in. Where'd it go? Back up in here. I know this episode is about choosing a refractor for visual, but why would you choose one over a Schmidt-Cassegrain? So Schmidt-Cassegrains and also Newtonians would fall into the reflectors are much easier to produce in larger apertures. Now, refractors, they generally top out at about 150 millimeter or 6-inch apertures. You can get bigger ones, but they're quite expensive and they're quite bulky and require very large mounts, and they're not easy to move around. If you look at like Newtonians, like our Dobsonians or like the Celestron Schmidt-Cassegrains, they start at about a 6-inch aperture and go up from there. It's much easier to make a larger mirror, and the mirror and that larger aperture is going to give you more dig into the nighttime sky. So the advantages of using, in particular for this question, the Schmidt-Cassegrain excels because it's compact and they have larger apertures. However, let's say you had a Schmidt-Cassegrain and a refractor of equal aperture size. I would pick the refractor if travel isn't a major problem, because the refractor has no central obstruction. The contrast tends to be better, and there's less light scatter, which also improves your contrast, and stars tend to be sharper. So, but we're probably talking a 5 or 6 inch Schmidt-Cassegrain versus a 5 or 6 inch refractor. Once we get up to that 8 inch class, it really falls off very quickly, because to get an 8 inch refractor is crazy expensive. And there's not very many affordable versions out there, and they're big. So for a Schmidt-Cassegrain, I would pick that if you really want to go bigger into those double-digit apertures. But I like refractors because they're lower maintenance and they tend to be sharper, but they can be bulky when you get to the upper sizes. So generally, I'll pick a refractor, but a nice Schmidt works well. Oh, my camera switched off. So. Let's see. What are your thoughts on the ASCAR 203? I have not had one in my hands. I would love to try one out. I'm a big fan of big refractors. I have seen a bit hit and miss of quality on the 185s. That's just what I've seen around. But the 203, that's a big refractor. That's a hard telescope to produce. And I have seen and worked with the Airy Disc 8-inch refractor. That one was very nice. But again, when we were talking about an 8-inch refractor, these are huge telescopes. They are massive refractors. The one up here, this is my Stellar View 180. It's a 7-inch. That is not a small telescope to work with, and it's sitting on an EQ8R. That's a big mount. And 8 inches even that much larger. So while these telescopes are impressive, 8-inch refractors start running into some issues. It's very hard to get an 8-inch refractor to acclimate. Those are very big, fairly thick pieces of glass, and they usually have air gaps between the objective elements. Those air gaps also need to reach ambient temperature. And I have talked to a number of people and manufacturers who've worked with refractors that big. And a lot of times we find that 7 inch is probably the max aperture realistically that you're going to want to mess around with. For transport capability, a 7 inch is like an observatory telescope, but you can use it in the field. But an 8 inch, you start to run into acclimation problems because of how much glass that you've got to cool down. And that's kind of regardless of the manufacturer. So if I was going to buy an 8-inch refractor, I would probably go something a bit more high-end. Probably, that's just my perspective. You get what you pay for. So there's a reason why things cost what they do. There's compromises that have to be put in place. Will EvoStar 100 provide a better visual experience at f9 compared to a 120, which is f7.5? They're both pretty nice. I can't say the 100 was any better than the 120. You'd probably have to have the two right next to each other. And it really depends on the night. I think you'd be hard-pressed to see a major difference between the two. The 120 is quite good. They spent a lot of time perfecting the 120. I think it really just comes down to what's your budget and what you want to do. Can you do astrophotography with a Skywatcher 16-inch Newtonian? I have seen people do lucky imaging, which is where you take a bunch of short exposures and stack them, like thousands of them. I've seen some really impressive stuff come from our go-to Dobsonians and other Dobsonians with tracking. It's a bit of a labor of love to do it, but I have seen some really amazing stuff come out with that. And I would not be surprised if in the future imaging with large aperture Dobsonians becomes more popular, because the cameras are so good nowadays and computer processors are getting better that it's an easy way to get a very fast, large aperture, high resolution imaging system without the need of all this really cumbersome stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised. And if you look at what the professional observatories do, many of them are shooting on alt-az systems nowadays. So something to think about. Comment, had a friend who bought ASCAR 140 refractor and ended it back, or sent it back because optics were bad. Now have a 140 stellar view and love it. Yeah. I would like to put my EQ8 on a Losmondy tripod. What did you do to get yours set up? Okay, so do I have a picture of mine somewhere? I do somewhere. Hold on just a sec. Little off topic, but what we're talking about it. So here's what I did. My problem is I have my... Hold on. Where'd my picture go? Whoops. So here's my 180 with an EQ8. My problem was I was on a software bisque tripod, which is a fantastic tripod. It weighs nothing for what it holds, but it's short. And when you're using a big refractor and you're looking straight up, it's really low to the ground. I looked at getting extenders. I looked at the ATS portable piers, which is what I really wanted to go with. They were amazing, but they were heavy. And for what I do, I was trying to get height and weight. So I ended up going with the Losmondy G11 tripod that they have, with just the standard little G11 cup on the top. I don't know what they actually call it. And then what I did after that is I have a homemade software bisque plate, which is pretty easy if you just know someone who can do a basic like machine work. It's just an aluminum square plate, and it has holes to match the bolt pattern of a software bisque mighty foot. And then there's a bolt that goes up and secures the EQ8 head, and two holes where the latitude adjustments screws go down. It's just an aluminum plate with 7 holes in it. That's it. And then on the top of my tripod, I have an ADM G11 to Mighty adapter plate. They sell that regularly. I just went to ADM's website and I ordered it. And that's how I did it. So it's pretty easy to do if you know someone who can work with aluminum and put some holes in it. You just need to look up your EQ8, get the holes machined in there, and get the adapter. So, but that worked really well. That tripod's 35 pounds. I really like the ATS portable piers. It was heavy, and it was a bit more than I wanted to spend when I just need to get this thing up off the ground. So that's what I did for mine. Hopefully that was helpful. So let's talk about aperture gains here. So wait, there's a question. Is that table in the background an adult size table? Now I have to look up the picture again. Oh no, it's a kid's table. Sorry. No, that's a small children's table. That's not an adult table. So do I have a picture of me sitting next to this thing just for height? I think I've got one somewhere, but not readily available at the moment. So let me see if I can find it really quick, just to give you guys a scale of the 7-inch on that tripod. Sorry, I swore I had a picture. Maybe it's not readily available. So, yeah, I don't know where that picture. Anyway, yeah, I don't have a picture of me next to it that I have laying around at the moment. So, anyway, but that tripod does a really nice job. If you're looking for something big and stable that holds an EQ8, but you need to get some kind of adapter made up, Los Mondi tripod does really great. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about Aperture. So there's a lot of Aperture sizes out there. I'm just going to stick with some really common ones. So 60 millimeter, we're going to start there. That has a limiting magnitude of 11.37 in the dark skies. So that's a 60 millimeter refractor. They're really good as little grab and go scopes. They're fantastic as really wide field scopes. A 70 millimeter, your limiting magnitude is going to be 11.7, and that's a 36% gain over a 60. So you're getting there. 70 is still small, convenient, and easy to work with. An 80, or a 3-inch refractor, your limiting magnitude is 12, and you're getting a 30% gain in aperture. Now, we need to remember when we're talking aperture and light gain, this applies to all telescopes or optics. You're not just measuring the diameter, you're actually doing the entire surface area of your objective. So all that's making a difference. It's not just the diameter. So an 80 millimeter, we're starting to get down there in magnitude where you can start to catch more stuff. Moving up to 100 millimeter, and I understand there's also 90s and stuff. I could be here all day listing every aperture size available out there. Limiting magnitude is now just shy of 12.5, and you're now a 57% gain over an 80. 100 millimeter is really where I start to recommend you look at refractors. Unless you have some specific needs, I don't like going under 80. I do have telescopes under 80, but they're for specific uses. 80, I would say, is if you're just getting started, and 80 is like bare minimum for aperture, especially when we're talking planets. And 80 is really kind of where you want to start. If you can get yourself a 100, now you're starting to cook with gas. So 100 is a very powerful instrument. And at nearly a limiting magnitude of 12.5, there's a lot of things that are now on the table for you to catch. If you want to mess with this, you can also use our Scope Wizard app. I need to check if it's been fixed on, I think Android was having some problems, and see if that's been addressed. But our Scope Wizard app, you can play with all these calculations. That's how I did it. Now, stepping up to the 5-inch category, so your 127s, 130s ballpark, now we're just over magnitude 13, and that's a 68% gain over a 100. That's getting up there. And then, of course, we have our, oh man, there's a freaking typo in there. It's going to drive me nuts. Hold on just a sec, because I can fix this on the fly. Because I want to keep this. There's that. And there's that. See if this doesn't mess me up. So I fixed it there, saving it. But now we're talking about 150 millimeter aperture, or 6-inch. This is a big refractor. When you start getting to that 5-6 inch category, it's a big scope. There's a 6-inch refractor right behind me. That's our short tube Star Travel 150 test scope, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But you can see the light gathering difference from going to 60 to 150. Usually when you're trying to pick a telescope and you're upgrading for visual, when it comes to light gain, I would always do the math and try to see what telescope gives you a magnitude jump over your existing telescope. And that rule applies to all designs. On smaller telescopes, getting a magnitude jump is a lot easier. On bigger telescopes, when we're talking 15-inch plus, the amount of physical jump you need to get that magnitude increase is nuts. I went from a 20-inch to a 28-inch. That's about a magnitude jump. 2830 is about a magnitude jump. A 10-inch difference to get the magnitude jump. You will not see me going bigger than 28 because I have to go to a 40 or a 1 meter to get that magnitude jump from the 28. So it gets worse and worse for your wallet and everything else when we talk bigger apertures. On refractors, it's a lot easier to do. So let's say you have an 80. If you have an 80 and you're like, okay, I'm ready to upgrade, you're probably going to want to look at something about 120 to 130 millimeter in aperture to get that jump and that extra punch that you're going to want. But for deep sky, you can see any and all Messier objects from a dark sky site with an 80 millimeter or a 3-inch telescope. About 12th magnitude, just under 12th is all the Messier objects. Now, a 100 millimeter would give you more resolution and it would be easier for you to catch it all. So, but having different telescopes of aperture is a nice thing to actually have. Now, a fun thing that you can do and something that I like to do once or twice a year is I like to have friends over. We make it kind of a party, usually in the winter or the fall when the weather's nice to be outside. Get together with your friends either at a spot that's easy to get to. I like to just host it at my house or in someone's backyard. And bring your telescopes. Bring all kinds of stuff and compare them. This was done earlier this year. We set up a bunch of different telescopes. We tried them out. We played on different targets. And it was really kind of fun to go from scope to scope to scope and just see the difference between all of them. And you can learn so much stuff from comparing telescopes. And it's also a really nice thing if you're new, if you've got a club, that you can meet with your friends, get to know people, and you can just get a crash course of experience trying all different kinds of things. And you can learn more with that than any book will ever teach you, or any YouTube. Books are great. Any YouTube stuff, sitting out there, having a good camaraderie event with your buddies, but also really learning how each telescope operates and seeing the nuances. That's kind of how I've learned what I've learned. I just mess around with stuff and it's fun. And sometimes it's like, wow, that sucks. Other times you learn a ton from all of this stuff. And just wrangle up your buddies and go do something, have a little star party. You don't need to go somewhere dark. Do it when you got the planets up, particularly with refractors, and see how they perform. Try it out. What focal ratio do you recommend for visual? Anything really works. It just kind of depends on what you want to do, but anything's pretty decent. Wide field. I need to speed it up. I've got some stuff to go through. Wide field scopes. Really, also anything else works. Wide field, I would say, is anything. It's more, I would say 700 and less, but I'll do 1,000 millimeter or less. That's where you can get a big chunk of sky. There's some really fast refractors on the market, like the Teleview MP101s, or the short tube refractors, or like the AR series from Explore Scientific. Those are wide field. But a nice short tube refractor, here's the Star Travel 150. A nice short tube refractor does wonders. And these aren't supposed to be some high-powered thing. These are low-power, big chunks of sky. They're great for panning through the Milky Way, looking at open clusters, galaxies, just cruising through the Milky Way and big chunks of sky. So short tube achromats are fantastic because they're not too expensive. You get some good aperture, and color correction doesn't matter because you're at like 12 power or something like that. So, and this is where we were talking about earlier. Having a small refractor can be a fantastic option, and you don't want to underestimate these small refractors. I call these companion telescopes. That's kind of my little term that I use for them, because they generally are a companion to a larger scope. Usually when I go out, you'll see pictures of my 7-inch refractor. It's got a little 76 Takahashi piggybacked. Or if I take like the 28 out, I'll take the FS60. And yeah, they are completely separate part of the spectrum. That's the point. Because when I'm out at a dark sky site, I'll be observing all these little faint things with the big scopes. But then there are times where it's like, well, I want to look at the North American Nebula. I want to look at the entire Veil Nebula. I want to cruise through the Milky Way and get big chunks of sky. I can't do that with my bigger scopes. So I bring a companion telescope, usually something small and easy to set up. Doesn't have a lot of aperture, but because the focal length is so short and has such a wide field of view, it's able to do things that my big scopes can't. So they complement each other really nicely. So is the FS60 that's pictured here, any little 60, 70 millimeter refractor, gonna kill it when you're looking at little galaxies? No, but they will destroy it when it comes to the North American, these big chunks of sky that bigger scopes just can't do. They complement each other. Is the Evo Guide 50DX good for wide field and much of a chunk will it collect? The Evo Guide 50DX is really more of a guide scope and small imager. It doesn't work well for visual. You can do it straight through, but it's very limited on its visual capabilities. There are other telescopes that I would recommend for doing really compact, small visual work. I'm a big fan of the Takahashi 60s. They're not the most well color corrected telescope, despite them being fluorite objectives. You can find one of these. There's a bunch of them on Astromart right now for under $1,000, which is a lot of money, but it's a Takahashi. But it weighs nothing, and they're adorable. So the FS60 is a really nice one. You could always find our EvoStar 72. Astrotech has a ton of 70s and 60s. I think Stellar View's got some. There's a lot of little refractors on the market that would work probably better visually over an Evo Guide 50DX. Now, for an Evo Guide 50DX would be a fantastic, ultra tiny astrograph, which when paired with like the Star Arizona Field Flattener or ours is a great super wide system for doing deep sky stuff, but visually not ideal. Let me move through here real quick. Planets is our last section. So with planets, aperture is really where it's at. You want to have that resolving power. So with planets, I would recommend 4-inch or larger. Achromatic refractors are going to show that chromatic aberration. So you probably want something that's going to be about f8 or longer, so it really controls that color aberration better. Fast ones, it's going to be a kaleidoscope. This short tube 150 behind me, I put that on the moon. It's a kaleidoscope. There's freaking colors everywhere. ED doublets are ideal for visual, like the EvoStar 100 f9, super sharp for planets. Although it's a little small, being 4-inch, you can chuck a ton of power on it, and it handles it well. It's fairly lightweight, but that's a great telescope if you want more punch on it than the EvoStar 120 is out there. And then, of course, you can get into the triplets as well. They're just going to be bigger and a little bit more cumbersome. But a triplet would work. But for planetary, I would recommend a 100 millimeter or larger. A 6-inch is really impressive, like the EvoStar 150s. I know there's the APM 152 if they still make that. There's a lot of doublets in this 120 to 150 category, or any apochromat. That would be a fantastic on planets. And refractors, when the seeing is good, you can just chuck power onto these things. A good refractor is a fantastic telescope for planets visually. So I'd say 100 millimeter to 150 millimeter if you can go up even bigger than that and you want to deal with it. And it's got well-corrected optics. That can also be really impressive as well. But apochromatics are going to be better for Planetary because they're going to control the color. That also goes along with lunar imaging as well. Let's see, a bit off tangent, but please confirm these visual doublets are actually good for astrophotography. Yeah, they work just fine. Mono astrophotography or black and white is even better because you can you'll refocus for each filter, so it's going to be really pinpoint. One shot color, your stars might not be as tight as a triplet because you're going to get a slight bit of bloating because not all the colors are being focused exactly at the same point, but it's acceptable. I have several friends who are using ED doublets and producing amazing images. The only way you could really tell the difference is if you had a really good triplet and shot it exactly the same way and measured it. But a nice ED doublet will work great for astrophotography, especially monochrome, because monochrome is very forgiving, the fact that you refocus for every color. How do 4.5 nanometer filters work on Newtonia F3 with a Nexus? The secondary will make not true at F3. Okay, so it's a bit off topic, but we'll go there. When you use faster telescopes for astrophotography, the light cone becomes steeper. As it becomes steeper, you are using narrowband filters for astrophotography. Now, narrowband filters like hydrogen alpha, sulfur 2, and oxygen 3, they come in various band passes, usually ranging from somewhere around 3 nanometers, which is incredibly tight, up to like 12, which is quite broad, but still narrowband. As we approach F3, that seems to be like the cutoff to where you need to start using more specialized high-speed filters. That might be a better question to call Star Arizona and ask them. F3 is like right on the cusp, and 4.5 you might be able to squeak by without having to go to a high-speed offset filter, but it's right on the cusp. If you get it and you try it and you get this weird reverse vignetting look, you know something's going wrong. And it's the light path is being clipped because the filter is so tight on that pass, it's actually clipping some of it. And you'll know that the problem is there, like I said, when you get a reverse vignetting. The outer edge will be bright and the center will be dark. That's how you know the filters are causing problems, and maybe you need to get a better filter suited to F3. So yeah, that's but going back, yeah, if we're doing planets with refractors, you either want a longer focal length achromat. If you do have something like the C6R, that 6-inch achromat from Celestron, you will see color. But I've had one of the best views of Mars with one of those telescopes, and yeah, there was color on it, but you can either chuck a filter in there to kind of cut that out, or Celestron really thought it through, and the cap of that telescope stops it down to a 4-inch. I think it turns it to like a 4-inch f12. That'll help eliminate some of that color aberration as well. Or you can get something like an ED doublet, or fluorite if you're working with Takahashi's, or ED triplets will be really nice there as well. So really it boils down to just find what works best for your needs. Achromats are going to be just fine for deep sky. You're not really pulling much bright objects out with that, so color aberration won't be a problem. But wide field, same thing. It's very low, very wide field of view, so not a big deal there. Planets and the moon is really where you're going to want those apochromatic designs, either an ED doublet if you're looking for something more budget-friendly and more convenient, or if you want to do overkill and it just happens to work for what you want, the ED triplets will be the best all around and most well-corrected. But if you're doing deep sky and wide field, it really doesn't need to be an apochromat at all. It just depends on what exactly you are wanting to do. Hold on just a sec. We're just about done. A couple things I want to run by you guys. I should have had some of this loaded earlier. There we go. Okay. So that's pretty much it for our episode. If you like what you see here, please go ahead and subscribe. Leave a like on a video. Lets us know we're doing a good job. You can head over to info@skywatchusa.com, title it What's Up, to check out or give us an idea for a future episode. But that is pretty much it for this week for choosing a refractor for visual. A little bit of an updated one. Next week, I'm actually really excited for this episode. We've been trying to work on this one for a while, and it's going to be pretty interesting. We're sitting down with Rick Hedrick, who's the president and co-founder of Observable Space, and he's of Planewave. So a Planewave and Observable Space have now teamed up. You can read all about it on their website. But we'll be sitting down with Rick Hedrick talking about all the Planewave scopes and all the crazy stuff that they make over there. So that's going to be really cool to have him on. And yeah, so it will be a pretty good time there. But that's it for this week on choosing a refractor. Couple things real quick. If you like what you see here, please go ahead, like and subscribe. You can also head over to our website if you want to pick up any kind of Skywatcher stuff. Skywatch.threadless.com for cool swag. Another thing real quick, this is a limited run. My stupid camera. I'm doing a limited run for my outreach program. If you are here in Arizona, you might be familiar with this brand, but my outreach program, Focus Astronomy, has teamed up with State 48. They're a local shirt manufacturer here in Arizona, and we're doing a special limited edition shirt that really, celebrates dark skies and astronomy here in Arizona. So this is the limited edition State 48 Focus shirt. This is our nocturnal version. So these are available for pre-order. You have to go on to focusastro.org, go up to shop, and you can pre-order it there. Once all the pre-orders are done, we'll put the order in, and then we'll get the shirts and ship them out from there. So it's going to be a few weeks if you want to place an order for one. All that goes to supporting Focus and our outreach programs and all stuff like that. So you can head over to focusastro.org and pick up one of those cool State 48 shirts. And it's made right here in Arizona. The shirts are printed here in Arizona. So you're supporting local as well. So head over there, check it out. There's our skywatcher.threadless. And yeah, we'll be back next week with Rick Hedrick. It's going to be fun. I hope you guys have a great weekend. And it's always nice hanging out with you guys. Glad you enjoyed the episode. And if you need anything else, head over and check it out. Oh, wait, there's one in here. What would you consider a high-end, great all-around refractor? The Takahashi 100DZ. That is the best 4-inch refractor currently available, especially for visual. I don't own mine anymore. Some good friends of mine have it, so I get to see it all the time. But yeah, if you want the ultimate 4-inch refractor, does great on plants, is great on deep sky. It's very lightweight, highly corrected. The Takahashi FC100DZ or any of the FC100s are the weapon of choice. And then have any Totem 2025 patches shipped? Yes, we've shipped some of them, but April and May have been really messy. We're going to get that all squared away, so we'll be fulfilling the last ones that we owe everyone here very soon, so we apologize for the delay. All right, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you guys next week for another episode of the What's Up Webcast. Have a safe week in clear skies, and talk to you later. Bye.